Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Let's Dev, where today we continue working on our game about a game gaming the gamer. The last time we added the first of the enemy types to our game, a melee-based slime enemy with gigantic eyes and a skull ghost thing would be our projectile-based enemy. Their implementation was nothing special, but it did give us a taste of the potential handicaps that come with the type of game that we're building. Since the inputs can be extremely chaotic, our enemies had to be balanced in a way as to not frustrate the player into giving up. I'm not so sure we found that sweet spot just yet, but today we're taking a break from our enemies to implement something else entirely. We'll be adding a whole bunch of items/weapons for our player to use. Indeed, other than the sword and much like the bomb added in a previous episode, we will be adding new items for the player to use in the game world. And of course, we will be adding effects and behaviors necessary for each item. Sounds like a plan, so let's get to the coding. First up were the addition of a current item variable and a switch. Next was our first item, the arrow for a bow and arrow. This addition would require a new projectile object, filled with several variables to make them project. Nothing out of the ordinary with the code here, so back in that new switch we made, similar to the code used to spawn a bomb was used to spawn an arrow. And just like that, our second usable item was added to the game. Arrows could now be fired in the direction the player is facing. So with that working, it was on to our next item. The next item was a lantern like the one used in Legend of Zelda. In fact, every item we'll be adding today might have been inspired by Legend of Zelda. Anyway, the flame would also use the projectile object, so an array and other modifications were added to accommodate for multiple projectile types. Then back in the switch, it seemed like an efficient idea to simply reuse the arrow spawn code. In fact, the idea sounded so good that the spawning code was then turned into a function to make things even more simple to execute. And thankfully, the extra effort wasn't a waste and the flame would spawn just as it should. Though it may need some extra code because upside down fire looks weird. But weird fire aside, this meant we could move on to our next item. For our third edition this session, it was the good old boomerang. The boomerang stats were added to the projectile object, then based on the boomerang's lifespan, halfway through, the direction of the projectile would update to return to the player. You know, like a boomerang usually does. Then, in the switch, just like the two before it, the boomerang would be spawned using our new projectile spawning function. Gotta love that code efficiency. And as one would hope, the boomerang ended up working just as it was coded. It would travel in the direction spawned, then turn around and head back towards the player halfway through its lifespan. And so with that working, it was on to our next and final item for the session, the potion. But first I decided our projectile object would be universal, so enemies could also use them in the future. And apparently that meant getting rid of the usage of that lovely function. I really don't know what I was thinking. Anyway, for the potion, we were going to need a struct to keep track of the player's stats. And for now, it's just health stats. Then back in the switch, a new case was made. A health check was then made, and if a player has a potion in their inventory, then it would heal the player for 1 health point and remove said potion. And based on the struct data being drawn to the screen, the potion did in fact work as intended. Our player is able to regain a point of health as long as they possess a potion, and when used, the has potion variable is set to false. Now, I'll be honest, I'm almost positive we'll need to increase the amount of potions the player can hold. In fact, almost everything we've added today will likely need to be reevaluated and balanced, mostly to accommodate the input queue system. But for now, this was again some great insight into taking traditional RPG items, in this case from The Legend of Zelda, and applying them to a much more chaotic environment. Things are getting quite interesting if I do say so myself. However, any more progress would have to wait because that was all the time I had for this session, which means that this is the end of today's episode of Let's Dev. So leave a like if you enjoyed the episode, subscribe and turn on notifications if you haven't already, and be sure to leave your thoughts on our progress in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.